Lastercast. For me and my good friend sitting in his car over there, Danny Torkel, Dr. Zayas God, talk about horror movies and streaming shows. We are huge fans of the streaming channel Shudder, and we've covered documentaries that have been on that channel, such as 101 Scariest Horror Movie Moments. You guys can go check that out if you want on our channel. But right now, we're covering their newest show. It is called Horror's Greatest. We are up to episode 3, and our background's pretty lame right now, isn't it, Danny?
A little bit. I have a feeling you got something brewing, though.
I do, actually. I was in the yard, and I was having some issues with them. This is probably our last time using them, which is kind of funny because it's got their logo up in the corner. There's no background right now. I'm going to use a different service that's actually cheaper, and we can have no background. No little watermark thing like we do in the corner, and we can have backgrounds again. So that'll probably start next week.
Okay. All right. Well, you're the one who does the tech for our channel. So I trust you, and I feel comfortable that you will guide us into a new era.
Yes.
Of Lastercastum.
Yes, there you go. But you're gonna have to guide us today because here comes a little shocker, Danny. You ready for this? I have not seen a single movie that was in this episode of Horror's Greatest. I haven't seen one.
It's sometimes I listen. This episode, I fully give you. Now, let me ask you this question though.
Yeah,
have you seen some of the Americanized remakes of some of these movies?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I this isn't like you. I feel like this is an episode where A, I can believe it, but B, I'm not going to like pass any judgment on you. A lot of these movies, especially pre 1999.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a lot of those movies.
Right.
And they're movies that are way up on the list. There are movies that are featured in this episode that are on a variety of different streaming service queues that I have.
Okay.
That like I've been meaning to watch. Some of them are like streaming on Max. Some of them, Max has like a pretty decent horror section with some classics, and
yeah.
Some of them are on Shudder. Some of them are on many other streaming platforms, and for a variety of reasons, I've not gotten to them. But yes, this episode is about J horror, specifically Japanese horror. I wanted to start by reading the quote that opens this episode.
Okay.
And it's written by somebody who we've talked a lot about, Connelly. She's a horror author. She's one of the leading talking heads for horror noir when that documentary was on Shudder. Her quote to open this episode is, "Real horror fans love foreign language horror.
Mm-hmm.
Real horror fans love exploring the boundaries of the genre. Just because by definition you can't be scared watching the same thing over and over again."
Yes, I love that quote so much.
And that quote reminded me also of Bong Joon-ho when he won Best Director for Parasite at the Academy Awards, and he, in his speech, he made this amazing allusion to like, don't allow 2 inches of text at the bottom of a screen ruin your movie viewing experience.
Right.
And this is something that since we've had our channel 4 years now and running, that I have really like pushed the button on, which is not you, but like the viewing audience should watch foreign horror.
Yeah.
I feel like year in, year out, we do our top 10 lists at the end of the year. Usually we do our top 10 lists in like February of the following year.
Right.
And almost always near the top or at the top of our list are foreign language horror films.
Right.
I mean, just last year, when Evil Lurks, from Argentina was near the top of our list.
Yep.
The year before that, we had a movie that is the topic of many discussions today for different reasons.
Yes.
Speak No Evil.
Right.
Is the remake is just released out in theaters, I think today or last night. And
yeah.
I don't know, have you seen a trailer for that? I haven't seen any advertising for it at all. It's incredible.
No. I mean, not in front of every fucking movie that I've seen for like the last 6 months. No.
Yeah. But so like the original Speak No Evil was I believe, Danish
yeah.
Production.
Right.
The Medium was a movie from Southeast Asia that was near the top of both of our lists, I think 2 or 3 years ago. And then between Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, so much great horror coming out of Asia. We've done an entire month dedicated to Dario Argento and Italian giallo horror. Please, everybody, watch foreign horror films. It's and I think the reason why I love Shudder spending really 2 episodes back to back, because the last episode of Horror's Greatest was on kaiju, which giant monsters, where so much of it had to do with Japan,
right,
and monsters coming out of Asia. If nothing else, I feel like this is going to get you, the person who's not seen a single one of these movies, you're going to do what any good documentary does. And you're going to come away with a list of movies that you're going to go and check out. And I did the same thing, because I have seen a number of these movies, but then there are some that they're just blind spots that, like I said, they've been sitting in a streaming queue for probably years now, waiting for me to click on them. And this is the type of motivation that I'm going to get to finally press play on some of those movies.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, like, they go through a whole bunch of them. And it's funny, when you watch the 3rd episode, you start to kind of see a pattern with this show, right? They make a lot of lists. They show a lot of lists towards the end of each episode. And the lists often say, like, the must-see movies, or they think of a specific, like, category within a certain genre, and then they list like the top 5 of that. Last week they had the top 5 giant monster fighters when they were talking about giant monsters. Then they eventually did one where they were talking about like the top 5 Godzilla movies. Then they did the like top 10 or top 12 giant monster movies. And that's pretty much every movie that they hit upon in each episode. So it makes you think that, like, when they construct an episode, they take like a top 10 list of a certain category, and then they just like elaborate on those movies in that list. Mm-hmm. So that's what they did with the J-horror movies this year. Now, they start off, obviously, and rightfully so, with movies that are like pretty old, that go back, I guess into the 50s at least. And they talk about these movies that are really inspired by like Japanese ghost stories. And one of the points they make right away at the beginning is that Japanese ghost stories and American ghost stories are significantly different, and that the ghosts themselves can sometimes be physical and appear human and kind of treated like living characters, but then other times they're ethereal, like the ghosts that we're used to.
And also, and this goes for foreign horror overall. Yeah. One of the things that I love about foreign horror films is they do things and they get away with things in their countries that in America are taboo and you cannot do. And so I was thinking, like, at the same time in America, a movie like The Haunting and the House on Haunted Hill, the original movies from, the movies from the 50s and the 60s. The Haunting, I think, comes out in 1963.
Yeah.
And I remember my mother, who in 1963 was 9 years old, telling me that was the scariest movie she'd ever seen.
Right.
And I've seen The Haunting, and The Haunting is good.
Yeah.
It's an excellent old ghost story, but like then you compare it to some of the movies that you're referencing. The big three, I think, of Japanese ghost story horror are Ugetsu, Onibaba, and Kwaidan, which I think they were kind of calling Kaidan or something like that. And those movies are not just ghost stories, but they're like sexy ghost stories.
Sexy ghost stories. Yeah.
And there's a lot of nudity and there's a lot of sexuality involved.
Yeah.
And all I kept thinking of watching that was these movies are coming out at the same time that like the movies in America, like it would take, like Psycho comes out in 1960, but it would really take until the 70s in America. Or let me say, Rosemary's Baby is 1968. Like that is a movie that comes out where there is some graphic nudity and obviously sexuality in that movie. But the ghost stories, there's nothing like that in American ghost stories.
Right.
Like, I think of 1980s The Changeling, one of my favorite ghost story horror movies, or haunted house horror movies. And there's nothing overtly sexual in that. It's a straightforward, this house is haunted. We're going to do a seance. We're going to figure out what's going on. And then you look at these clips from movies like Onibaba and Ugetsu, and you're like, wow, they are really like letting it all hang out in these movies with these ghost stories where I forgot which one of those three it is, where it's like the scene where the guy leaves his wife and kid for a ghost. And then when he comes back, his wife is dead, but then he gets to spend one more night with his ghost wife before waking up. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, they also have like a lot of people who are experts in Japanese horror here to really like, just like last week with the kaiju, they bring up the impact of post-war Japan.
Right.
And just what it must have been like for these artists, these writers, these directors to grow up post, maybe having survived the atomic bombs, and now that was 1945. Now it's 10 to 15, 20 years later.
Right.
And Japan is trying to rebuild its industries, and, everybody is going back to work. They talk about that a lot with Tetsuo the Iron Man.
Yeah.
And how like these are now the kids of the survivors of the bomb.
Right, right.
And it has to be, that's such an interesting, I would love to take a like college level history course on post-war Japan.
Right.
And just see what the rebuilding process was, not just obviously for the movie industry, but just in general. Because if you look at the movies that come out of it, you get these incredibly beautiful looking ghost stories that have like some genuinely scary shit in them. And then you also get obviously the giant monster kaiju movies, the Godzillas, and all the way up until last year with Godzilla -1. Here we are. I brought this up at the beginning. Last year, your number one movie, I think, of the year, my number two, was a Japanese horror film, Godzilla -1, that, everybody, shocked the world by doing. It released the exact same year that we released the Godzilla movie. And I don't know anyone who is going to say, now, other people love the Godzilla, King Kong Monsterverse movies.
Right.
But I don't know anybody in the film criticism circle who's going to go, Godzilla -1 was good, but it was no Godzilla X Kong.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah. So, again, it's just, I'd really love to dig deeper into that, what's going on in post-war Japan and how this artistic these artistic visions and the direction that horror movies take. I find that so fascinating.
Yeah, well, that brings up. I want to give a shout out to Mike Bongiorno because I think he's like one of our steady fans, and he's been on the show before, but he watches pretty much every episode we put out. But he's really been into this Horror's Greatest series that we've been covering, and he's a college professor, right? And he covers this kind of stuff. At the college that he and I went to, they had a course called Third World Cinema, where they went over movies that were made in different countries. But it's interesting because like they had Ireland at one point. They had like Northern Ireland, and we watched The Butcher Boy by Neil Jordan. They had Italy at one point because after World War II, Italy could have been considered a third world country, And what's interesting about this episode of Horror's Greatest is they really lean heavy on their Japanese film historians, who they introduced last episode, but they're pretty much the main talking heads for this episode. And they bring in this one Shudder guy that they haven't shown in the last 2 episodes. I can't remember his fucking name off the top of my head, though. But this guy, I feel like he does the bulk of the talking this episode. And it's funny because we've already kind of seen a show very similar to this. We've seen 101 Scariest Horror Movie Moments. What's going to separate this show from the other ones is this focus on like Japanese horror, right? And to me, like they brought this one term, right? They brought the miracle generation. One of the Japanese film historians referred to the generation after World War II as the miracle generation. And it's just so funny to hear that term because we talk about the people that were in World War II that grew up during the Great Depression as the greatest generation in the United States. Mm-hmm. Then we talk about their children as boomers. But in Japan, they literally had a generation called the Miracle Generation who had to essentially rebuild Japan, And that's where we get these films from, this Miracle Generation, at least the beginning films in this episode. I feel kind of like a poser talking about any of these movies since I haven't seen them, but I will comment on what you said, where it's like there's like explicit nudity and sexuality that they show in these clips. That's one of the things as like a foreign film, a lover of film, and then you start to see foreign films, is that you're like, oh my God, I can't believe they can show this. I can't believe they can show that, and you live in New York, and there was like what Kim's Video in the Village where they'd have like all these rare videotapes and stuff like that.
They opened up an Alamo in Lower Manhattan, like in like Wall Street, and it's in like an office building, and then you have to go downstairs like a couple flights of like an elevator, like an escalator. You have to take escalators down like a couple flights. Okay. And the Alamo Draft House is in the basement of this building in Lower Manhattan, and they have a Kim's Video there still. And you could actually rent movies from the Kim's Video at the Alamo in Lower Manhattan.
That's fucking awesome.
Yeah, I've only been to that Alamo once because it's not convenient to get there from my house via train, and there's no parking in that section of Manhattan. Whereas obviously there's another Alamo in Brooklyn that is like right off the train line of my house. That's the one I go to most of the time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't, as far as like going forward with these reviews, I can just kind of like tee up the talking points and you can kind of give me your 2 cents. But
do you remember, I don't know when did you move out of New York?
Oh, 15 years ago at this point.
Okay. So do you remember going to either like King's Plaza in Brooklyn or the Staten Island Mall, and they would always have a cart in the middle selling like foreign DVDs, and a lot of them were like kung fu movies. A lot of them were like imported out of Asia. I got a lot of like stuff from those carts in the mall. That's where, believe it or not, I'm looking for, that's where I first saw Audition. Like I had heard of Audition, and then like I remember like telling the guy at King's Plaza, I was like, do you know this movie like out of Japan called Audition? He goes, come see me next week. I'll get you next week. And I was like, okay. And I remember going back to the mall the next week, and it felt like I was doing a drug deal. Like it felt like I was like secretly handing a guy like $40 for a DVD in like 2001, and
Yeah.
I felt like I was like doing something wrong. But like a lot of my friends were getting like anime, a lot of my friends were getting like kung fu movies, and like I was trying to get some of those like imported Asian horror movies.
Yeah.
So I the good old days of going to the mall before we became too much of an adult.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's this exciting feeling going and picking up this tape and stuff like that. And that was like that for anime for me too. I remember like, oh man, Ninja Scroll, like, oh, there's sex in this cartoon. Oh my god, right? Or you see like Akira and you just can't believe what the fuck you're watching. Yeah.
I don't know if you saw my Facebook post the other day, but the freaking Sheepshead Bay movie theater in my neighborhood had Ninja Scroll for 2 days, and I went just Wednesday night to see Ninja Scroll in the movie theater. First time I had seen that in, it's got to be close, maybe 20 years.
Yeah.
Man, freaking great. That's a freaking horror movie. That could go on a list of freaking Japanese horror movies right there.
Yeah, well, I was wondering if they were going to cover anime in this, and I was thinking, oh, are they going to do like almost like an animated horror thing? But I don't think they are, because there's not a lot of good American versions of horror movies that are cartoons. But going back to Audition, Audition is an interesting movie because I've always heard about Audition. I've seen like the exact clips that they show in this episode, because they've made shows like this before where they talk about this scariest horror movies, scariest horror moments, right? And they always show that fucking scene where she's sitting there and she's talking, I think, on the phone for a while, and there's a bag next to her. And then at the end of the scene, this thing makes a weird noise and like rolls. I saw that and I was like, holy shit. And then, of course, I've seen where she has, like, I guess the piano wire and she's like sawing off the guy's leg. And honestly, just seeing that image, I was like, fuck, do not think I could take that movie. So
Audition it's one of those movies where it starts out as one thing and then it devolves into what it becomes. And you're just left at the end wondering, how the fuck did I get here? What did I just watch? And it lives up to every bit of the hype it has. And I brought up last week because he's apparently done a monster movie, Takashi Miike. He might be a director who, for some, pushes things to a limit. One of those movies that I remember seeing way too young and going out and like looking for a copy of, and I think I still have a copy of it on DVD somewhere, is Ichi the Killer. That is, again, a movie that you might want to turn off after 5 minutes, and I will not harbor any ill will towards you because it is something else. He a couple of his movies featured, even in like little bits. They showed a bit from a movie called Gozu that I also think he directed. I want to say the original One Missed Call.
Okay.
I think he directed that as well. But he's just such a weird director. Like, and they make a point of, they did like a little background about him. Audition is probably the movie he's most known for, justifiably so. But then, like, he's also done like a horror musical. He's also done a superhero style action movie. He did a kaiju movie. I think The Great Yokai War is the one that he did. If you are alone in your house, if Shari has taken the girls for the day, and you feel up to it, I recommend Takashi Miike trying to get through one and then see if you can get through something else.
Okay. I mean, honestly, one of the things that this show does is it makes everything seem really appealing, and it did make his movies seem really appealing. You know, just like it sounds like, I think, isn't there a quote in this episode where someone says that he gets a bad script and like he's excited about getting a bad script, or like a script for a bad movie, and he's like, That's what I can work with. Do you remember that quote that I'm talking about?
I remember somebody saying it, but yeah, that does feel a lot, because a lot of his movies don't, I don't want to say they don't make sense, but they, like, it doesn't make sense that somebody read this script and said, I want to make this movie. But then he
Right.
goes and makes these like fucking insane movies. I also just want to, because we kind of jumped from like those 50s and 60s movies now to like more late 90s, 2000s.
Yeah.
House.
Oh yeah, you saw that one.
House is one of the most fun and ridiculous movie experiences that I've ever sat through.
Okay.
You talk about a movie that you're watching and you cannot believe what you're watching, but in the best possible way. Like, there's movies where you're watching them and you're like, I can't fucking believe what I'm watching. Like, what is this shit? And you're mad at yourself that you didn't turn it off. House is the opposite. House is if you like took all the drugs and you're like, I can't believe what I'm watching.
Yeah.
Insane.
Yeah.
It is that crazy. And I'm pretty sure, I think like it's a Criterion Collection movie. I think it's streaming on a couple different services. That is one that is so wild and bonkers.
Yeah.
That it's just a joy to get through. Like, that was like the first, when they showed that, I was like, okay, sure, that might be the next, like, that might be the first movie from this episode that we watch together.
Yeah, it looked fucking crazy. And they make a point saying that, like, they don't try to make things seem realistic in that movie. Like, they use, like, animation and stuff at certain points, right? And
yeah,
a girl gets eaten by a fucking piano at one point. You know, it looks crazy, man.
Yeah, it's a shitload of fun.
Yeah. Well, so, we're talking about like movies that come direct to video, and it sounds like in Japan, the culture there, a lot of these horror movies are direct to video there as well. They make a mention of that, how there's like V cinema or straight to video horror movies. And I think that that's where you get things like The Grudge. Now, I've seen the American version of Ju-on The Grudge, but I'm assuming that the Japanese version is superior.
So here's the weird thing about The Grudge. The director of The Grudge remade his own movie in America. So the not Sarah Jessica Parker. Oh dear Lord.
Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Yeah.
I always mix those two up because of their 3-part names that start with Sarah.
Right.
Sarah Michelle Gellar Grudge, that came out in, I think, 2002, is directed by, I want to say, Tamashi Shimizu. I think that's the director's name. He like remade his own movie in America. And I remember seeing The Grudge in America and going, eh. And then I don't know why I watched the original.
Yeah.
Because I was like, if the Americanized one didn't do anything for me, why would the original do anything for me if it's the same director?
Right.
And it's basically the same movie, but for some reason the Japanese one hit a little bit harder and actually got me a little unnerved. So
sure.
And I feel the same way about The Ring and the original Ring in Japan as well. My history with The Ring, Gore Verbinski's remake of The Ring, is kind of funny. I had 3 of my friends came up to Binghamton while I was up in college.
Yeah.
And while we were up for the weekend, we decided, let's go see, there's a new horror movie out. Let's go see this new movie, The Ring.
Right.
And a lot of people in the theater were scared, screaming. And the 4 of us sat there and we hated it. We were laughing. There's a scene where the horse goes crazy on the boat and we were like hysterically laughing.
Oh God.
And then at the end of the movie, the most infamous scene in the movie, she climbs out of the thing and and I literally whispered to a friend of mine in the movie theater, I went, if she climbs through this television, this is the fucking dumbest movie I've ever seen. And she climbs through the TV. It's like this notorious moment that everyone loves. And I remember sitting there going, oh my God, how fucking stupid is this? And years have gone by. I've rewatched The Ring since then. I think I watched it with Charlotte. I still don't love it, but I also think maybe I was a little too hard on it back in 2002. But
Right.
again, I have watched Ringu or Ring, the original, and I think it's a better movie. It doesn't have like the level of gore, and it doesn't have like the makeup effects on the faces that make them look so disgusting and scary.
Distorted, yeah.
But I just, there's something about Japanese horror and the way that they do ghosts and the way that they move in Japan that is just so creepy. And it works for me better as the original versions than the Americanized remakes. That being said, I will say I think the Americanized remakes, I mean, they were huge hits, and I think that those Americanized remakes, especially the Ring and the Grudge, they actually, unlike many remakes, they actually did a service to the J-horror industry. I don't think we're watching in 2024. I don't think we're watching an episode of a Shudder series on horror's greatest J-horror unless the Americanized versions of The Ring and the Grudge were as successful and as well remembered by horror fans, probably of our age. Because those movies came out when we were like 20 to 22, 23 years old. And we're, you know, a lot of the people who are the talking heads and a lot of the people who are making these shows are, you know, they're, a lot of the horror filmmakers today are around our age. Stupidly, some of them are even younger. And, you know, I think that even though they weren't for me back in 2002, they were for the general audience. And the appeal of those movies, I think, shows by the fact that we're sitting here in 2024 talking about horror's greatest J-horror movies. If those movies aren't a success, I don't think they're spending 55 minutes on an episode talking about J-horror.
Right. Really good point. I mean, and I remember the exact moment they sort of kind of touched down in the United States, right? Because the way that we were going with horror when we were teenagers, we're going to the movies all the time, we're really into movies. You know, you had these like sort of sleek slasher movies, and there was a whole abundance of them, which were like a byproduct of Scream, right? And then you know, you're starting to like self-parody and stuff like that. And before you get to the next level, that's kind of when the J-horror stuff comes in. It comes in right before that, like right before they get to this like sort of like, I don't want to say torture porn, but like movies where it's like Saw and Hostel, right? Like right before that, that's when you get this J-horror stuff.
Yeah.
And like Sarah Michelle Gellar, you know, she's in like, I know what she did last summer. She's in Scream 2. She's in that kind of wave of like slick slashers. But then as she's like an older woman in The Grudge, not much older, you know, but it's kind of like, you know, we've moved on and we try these Japanese movies. And I think that they really influenced horror in the United States moving forward.
And then they started to fall almost into self-parody where like you had and some of the movies that they talk about here, like Pulse, One Missed Call, those were also remade in America and they were terrible. And I think when people started to be like, okay, we like The Ring, then, you know, Ring 2 came out, then The Grudge 2 came out, and it was like, all right, everybody, we're done with these movies now. And then you started to get a combination of found footage and, even though I hate the term, torture porn in the mid-2000s to end that decade.
Right.
Yeah, it was like, okay, now we're going to give you Paranormal Activity. Now we're going to give you Saw and Hostel, and there's going to be a new one of those every year until you're tired of those.
Right. So that's been our movie going experience. I didn't see Pulse the American version, or for the American versions, I've only seen The Ring and The Grudge, and
Did
then
you
I
see
haven't seen
Dark Water with Jennifer Connelly?
that.
That was not a bad J horror remake. I actually still never saw the original Dark Water, but that one wasn't bad.
Yeah.
That was Jennifer Connelly, I believe, in that.
It's interesting because they always get these like really beautiful leading ladies, right? They have like Sarah Michelle Gellar in The Grudge, Naomi Watts in The Ring. Because don't they even have what's her face? She played the Invisible Woman in the old Fantastic Four movie.
Jessica Alba?
Right. Is it because she's in The Eye, right? And that's another J horror.
That's not. I don't know if that's J horror or it's from an Asian movie. I don't know if it's South Korean but it is definitely an Asian horror film.
Okay.
I think Shannon Sossaman, who was like the It Thing for a couple years, 40 days, 40 days, 40 nights, A Knight's Tale, that actress.
Oh yeah, I know
she
her.
was in the One Missed Call remake.
Yeah.
And then there's two movies before we go. There's two movies that I want to bring up that we haven't really talked about.
Yeah, please.
One of them is a movie that I have not seen, and I have heard so much about this movie.
Okay.
Called Cure.
Yes.
And I feel like, and I asked you this last time. I said, okay, Pete, give me the 5 movies that you saw here in this episode that you're going to want to go out and watch. For me, Cure is number 1 because I've just heard so much about it. And just from looking at some of the clips that they show, it looks amazing. And I love that idea where it feels like it's like a crime procedural almost.
Yeah, yeah.
And that there's horror elements to that. The other movie is one of the ones that I have seen, and it's one of the more infamous ones. And I know you said you haven't seen it, but I'll ask you this. Have you seen and read The Hunger Games?
Yeah, The Hunger Games I have. Yes.
So when The Hunger Games was big, did you ever hear anybody compare it to Battle Royale?
Of course, yes, absolutely.
Okay. Battle Royale is another movie that, like, I had friends that got into like Japanese culture, Japanese horror, and it became like a movie night where we watched Battle Royale. And I remember seeing The Hunger Games and loving The Hunger Games, and then thinking for a second and being like, oh, wait a minute, this is kind of just like a really beefed up version of Battle Royale.
Right.
And there was like some controversy, I think, when The Hunger Games, I don't know if there was any kind of lawsuit or anything, or I guess they're different enough, but the idea of the first Battle Royale is absolutely fucking great. And it is so worth watching. And it actually hits harder to watch as a teacher because you know how your students behave, and like once you see Battle Royale, you go to class the next day and you're like, all right, if this is the class, who's gonna win?
Right.
It's like, is it that loud idiot over there, or is it that quiet girl in the corner who doesn't talk much, who ends up being a psychopath? And,
right.
And it really fucks with your mind if you're a teacher, because you start to look at your students a little bit differently.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. And Battle Royale is this movie that I've always actually wanted to watch too, because it looks just like this crazy kinetic fun, random violence.
Yeah. It's like,
go ahead.
It's like a fucking gory action movie, but like with a plot that feels like it's a horror movie.
Yeah. And they were saying, I think in this episode, they were saying that it felt the most like an anime too, right? Like out of those. So real quick to kind of like just wrap up, at the end of the episode, they go ahead and they say 12 must-see Japanese horror movies. And of course, that's like the movies that they reviewed. Can I just kind of list them and you say which ones you have seen?
Sure.
Okay. So Ugetsu.
I was gonna just count the ones that I've seen as you're going through. I've not seen Ugetsu, Onibaba, or Kwaidan.
Okay. But you have seen Houseu, you have seen Tetsuro the Iron Man, you have seen Audition, Ju-on, the Grudge, Battle Royale, Ring, and then Cure. You said,
I have not seen Cure.
and then Pulse, and then the other one that we haven't mentioned is Noroi the Curse.
Yeah, I haven't seen that either. That's another one that I've heard really good things about.
Yeah, that one looked pretty wild too.
Yeah.
Like that one's like a found footage Japanese horror.
Yeah, and then there's the thing that like we didn't mention is like the later stages of like the J horror movies that come post the the the, the Grudge and the Ring. A lot of them are based in tech. So like obviously the Ring is a videotape, but then you get into like One Missed Call. It's like the first cell phone horror movie. Then you get Pulse, which is about electronics in general, and then you get The Curse, which is found footage. And I think that kind of toyed with the idea that like, oh, the Japanese are so advanced technologically that
that they'll get
it only
murdered
makes
by
sense
it.
that their technological advancements are haunted.
Right. No, I mean it's great stuff, and it's like scary stuff. I want to watch a lot of these Japanese movies. I'm glad that you mentioned that they're on Shudder, and I mean rightfully so. If they're going to talk about these movies in detail, they should at least offer some of them for people to check out, right? So, next week's episode of Horror's Greatest, Mike Bongiorno was saying he wanted to come on for it because it's horror comedies. I'm down for that, man.
I genuinely think some of my favorite movies, not horror movies, movies ever made are horror comedies. I just took Charlotte to see Shaun of the Dead for its 20th anniversary on in a dine-in theater with in a giant Dolby cinema, and it looked and sounded amazing, and it holds up so well. I mean, Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness are two of like my cornerstone horror movies growing up. I mean, there's a reason why I would never call them horror comedies, but there's a reason why Freddy Krueger is the character I associate with getting me into horror, because Freddy made jokes before he killed you. Right. And, you know, I always associated Dream Warriors it's that movie for me. And, here it is, Jennifer, your big break in TV. The idea of telling like almost a bad dad joke right before you murder somebody in a horrific way. That's why I'll always put Freddy above Jason and above Michael and above and even Chucky as well, because I loved that killer with a sense of humor thing. So I cannot wait till next week. I'm so excited for next week's episode. It's like hitting me right in like my horror feels.
Nice. Yeah, me too, man. I'm fucking
and definitely excited. and definitely invite Mike to come on. That's awesome.
Awesome, man. Cool. Well, it's been fun considering that I didn't see one of these fucking movies and I couldn't say anything about them, right? But why don't you go ahead, Danny, and tell people what else people can expect from our channel if they just tuned in for the first time.
On the channel now, obviously, we have this is our third episode. So we have Horror's Greatest episodes 1 and 2 up for review. We did 2 deep dive reviews of 2 we're calling them horror movies. They're definitely genre films, Red Rooms and Strange Darling, which were 2 of our favorite movies of the year, and we deep dived into them. Red Rooms is still available. If you live in the New York City area, it's still playing at the IFC Center. Strange Darling, I believe, is still in some cinemas. I think Alamo still has it playing there in the New York City area. We have covered all of Interview with a Vampire and on what channel was that on?
AMC.
AMC, yes, on AMC. And we I'm ready to do a book review of Vampire Lestat whenever you are. So that could be one of something that we have coming up. I'm really excited because we're filming this September 14th, and we are now just about a month away from New York City Comic Con, and they are just loading up the horror side of the Comic Con bracket. Mike Flanagan, Kate Siegel, Raul Coley, and oh dear Lord, from Fall of the House of Usher, and they're going to be there. They're going to do. I'm assuming that because 4 of them are going to be there, they're going to have a panel. But they're all going to be there. I just saw an advertisement that said Ty West is going to be there. I mean, if you dig into the depths of our channel over the last 4 years, we've covered almost every Mike Flanagan project, episode by episode of his shows, his movies. We earlier this year, we did a Ty West retrospective because of Maxine coming out, and we covered almost all of his films. So the idea that I'm going to be able to go and meet 2 of my favorite modern horror directors in about a month, I'm hoping they have panel discussions. I messaged you. The Mayfair Witches has a main stage panel on the opening day, which means I am going to binge rewatch the Mayfair Witches. I only made it 2 episodes in, but I definitely want to go back, view it with a fresh eye, and see what they have planned for Comic-Con. I'm very excited about that. See who's going to be there. So, yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff coming up on the channel, and you can go back and you can find a ton of awesome stuff that we've covered. Ty West, Mike Flanagan, Interview with a Vampire, or more recently, Red Room, Strange Darlings, Horror's Greatest, you name it.
Yeah. It's fucking spooky season, man. It's the best time to watch a channel covering horror shows. So make sure that you are subscribed to the Lastercast. Leave some comments. Danny does an awesome job of responding to them. We love hearing from y'all. And you know what, guys? We will see you next week for episode 4 of Horror's Greatest. See you then.